Yeah, well, there are two basic changes. One is during President Trump's presidency, his approach was to meet with the leader and, in a way, passing over the interagency process. So it was a top-down process where the bureaucratic expertise was not really involved. So the approach of Mr. Biden, of course, is very different. It's not a top-down, but it's more of a down-top process where the assistant secretary level, the lead person is Sung Kim, the special representative for the Korean Peninsula affairs. So the approach is different. Second, the substance is also a bit uncertainly different. In other words, when Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim Jong-un of North Korea met, North Koreans wanted to begin the negotiation by providing a step-by-step disarmament or arms control, which was to be responded in every step by response from the U.S., namely removing sanctions, beginning with financial aid, and so on. That process didn't take place. So the Biden administration, I believe, is after the Korea review policy process, will also probably want to proceed with the negotiations, again, based on more for more. In other words, North Korea would take the first step, and United States and South Korea will respond. So that's kind of the overall approach and substance that is a bit unclear, but there are differences. In terms of denuclearization, it's a long way off, as you know. The South Korean government has been involved, and we already have a legal framework with North Korea in terms of all the steps that are necessary for disarmament, beginning with 1991, the agreement between North and South Korea on denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, when all the U.S. Tactical and short-range nuclear weapons were removed. And obviously, it's now after 30 years, so denuclearization has to go very far away. And again, no summit between South Korean leader and North Korean leader for the past 2 years. And then even there's no meeting between the North Koreans and even the State Department since Mr. Biden came in. So denuclearization is a very long way off. However, obviously, if denuclearization were to occur within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, of which we have no idea, then obviously it will decrease tension and the arms race in the region, of course, including North Korea, United States, and South Korea, and of course, neighboring China, Russia, and so on, and including Japan. Yeah. There are three levels of conflict that exist, which I would argue go beyond the military dimension. One is the political tension. In other words, every time North Korea announces that they will either begin a negotiation or they will stop the negotiation, it divides the South Korean political sector, the conservative opposition and the progressive ruling party, the majority, and the one who is headed by the current president. So the political tension is quite serious because it has to do with political stability on the South, and also the NGOs, which are part of the progressive system that is very powerful. So one is the internal political stability of South Korea. And of course, the other one, of course, before we talk about tension and conflict, which is directly related with potential meltdown, is that since COVID-19, North Korea has shut down its country, sealed its border with both China and of course with South Korea. So the economic condition could not be even worse. It has negative 10% growth rate, according to a very conservative estimate. So that may lead into some kind of a regime instability as of today. So political tension may lead into a meltdown, and if it's a meltdown, then you could see a potential civil or political tension and conflict. Number one. Number two, is the weapons force structure that North Korea has, which is two. One is short and medium range, long range artillery, which is can be tipped by nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. But without even the weapons of mass destruction, the long range artillery can destroy up to 80% of the South Korean industrial and non-industrial infrastructure, including the population. The second one, of course, is a very, very increasingly becoming accurate and very lethal nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. So these weapons are being deterred by the South Korean force structure in alliance with the United States. And so that poses a serious threat. But the potential for conflict, I would argue, can be of an accidental nature because of the very short depth. In other words, the distance between North and South Korea is divided by only about 50 kilometers. So because of heavy militarization, both in the North and the South, backed up by the US forces, any missteps can lead into a accidental war. And the third one, of course, is the fact that if you look at very specifically at North Korean nuclear strategy, one of their ways to advance and destabilize and potentially even provoke is to initiate a warfare where we would not know that the actual weapons of mass destruction, whether it's a bomb or through a long range or short range artillery or from nuclear weapons, cannot be known whether it was initiated by North Korea. So this is a very complicated, increasingly difficult arms race on the peninsula. And of course, the third, of course, is that if and when actually there is a conventional and unconventional attack, meaning soldiers and tanks and the Air Force, and using the weapons of mass destruction, then that would be extremely devastating. And I would argue that probably that will end up the North Korean state existing as a state, where probably 95% of the entire industrial and non-industrial structures would be destroyed, with the US extended deterrence and the US forces in Japan and from Guam, of course, there's a nuclear component. So it'll be a major peninsula and potential regional conflict where it would complicate further the Chinese and the Russian nuclear and non-nuclear posture. Very good question. As I said, if you look at the details of the so-called the 1991 Joint Arms Control Commission, which was signed by North and South Korea with the support of the United States, all the phases, all the arms control leading to disarmament, beginning with, as we call it, the pre-confidence and security building measures like publishing a white paper on defense expenditures, but the issue is it's not been implemented. But if the steps are taken, let's say a sector of Yeonbyeon or a major research facility is destroyed, then of course verification is extremely important, because if you don't verify, then trust cannot come. And what's very clear is that since even 1991, when the major agreement was taken right after the Cold War, when Russia inherited the legacy of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation in 1991, end of the Cold War. And so the global environment was very conducive for the inter-Korean reconciliation, and yet we have no progress. So once again, I cannot confirm and to state enough the importance of verification and inspection regime. And whether they will allow it or not is a different question, because they kicked out all the IAEA monitoring officials more than, I believe, more than 10 or 15 years ago. So verification is extremely important. Yeah. Very critical, I would argue. I think all the objectives are extremely important, and that we should believe in that objective. And in spite of the difficulties, that I think we should go ahead. And I think the Luxembourg Forum and its mission is very important in this sense, as a very important global non-governmental forum in which major powers and middle powers and even small powers like Korea get to participate. So I'm very grateful. Now, having said that, um, the actuality since 91, and as you probably know, since the past 10 years, because of the misperception, because of the mismanagement, and of the relationship between United States and Russia, that arms control, as you know, in spite of the excellent studies published by Dr. Arbatov and members of the Council of the esteemed Luxembourg Forum, actual steps has not been able to be taken. In fact, the Conventional Forces Treaty in Europe, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, all these, as you know, are at peril. They're in danger. The leadership factor is very important. And on this one, it's not because I belong to the Luxembourg Forum, but as somebody who understands the history of Russia as a major accepted power in the European and global security system since 1815, following the Napoleonic War revolution, that even if you don't have agenda, that the Soviet Union and of course the successor state of Russia should be invited and to discuss and to be consulted on all major international security issues. And I think the problem here really has been of two nature. One is the inability, since I've been arguing since the attempted expansion of NATO in the 1990s, that Russia, of course, has its legitimate security interest. And it has its interest in terms of its internal ethnic regions, and it has also its interest in the Near East and the Far East. Now, how you define the interest should be really worked out and planned long term, but I believe the West has really ignored these. And so, and then of course, by giving maybe false hopes and unrealistic policy support at the rhetorical level has made it even difficult, particularly in Ukraine and the Caucasus and the regions that probably you know better than I do. So the entire issue of Russia's role in terms of arms control, nuclear weapons, United States, has to do with strategic and political relations, number one. And then, of course, you have the Chinese factor, where they are increasingly developing not only their nuclear weapons, but also space power, which is extremely important, because that is what enables the protection of the fourth industrial revolution and important key IT sectors. So again, yeah, the mission, a dream, yes, but you need to work it out step by step. And I think from what I see in terms of the leadership as I see today, particularly following the horrendous withdrawal from Afghanistan as of late, leadership factor, foreign policy establishment advisor to the president, very important, and also important for Russia, and also for the near abroad, and also for the former East European countries. And of course, NATO is important because it's divided and not in unison, not to mention the policy dissonance in the major hegemonic powers. So that's my comment, if I may. Areas of what we call extreme high tension, which may or may not lead into a local conflict, but one is the peninsula, which I already talked about, so that I'm not going to go into. But there are two areas that I'm sure you know. One is the Southeast Asian sector, where the South China Sea and the increasing competition between the regime of legal right to pass both commercial and military, all the way from the Gulf to the Malacca Strait up to the South China Sea, is an important sea lanes of communication. So this has been traditionally protected in the Asian region by, of course, the Seventh Fleet, which is the main arm of the U.S. Pacific Command. And the Guam is an important area because Guam hosts the submarine and the Air Force for the U.S. Pacific Command. So the right to free passage, and then the territorial conflict, which is related with also access to energy between the select members of the ASEAN and China, and then the increasing unison which President Biden sought in the G20 summit in Reykjavik, and then as of we speak today, there's a British aircraft carrier and the destroyers which are exercising in the sea, and they're making a phone call to South Korea. So in other words, the buildup of the Chinese military and building the so-called the artificial islands, Western perception, and for the Chinese, regaining the lost maritime territories by building these islands and militarization, I think is an area that has very high levels of tension and lots of skirmishes without actual confrontation. That's one sector. The other one, which is political, but can lead into greater military tension, is, of course, Hong Kong and Taiwan. Hong Kong, have to be careful. Hong Kong is part of the Chinese territory, but they agreed with the British since the regaining the territorial sovereignty to basically run it as a one state but two country system, right? But obviously, the increasing assertions of Chinese sovereignty here, I'm being very diplomatic, is privy to international condemnation, particularly the NATO countries and the United States. So I think that has to be managed. It's an internal problem, and I think the Chinese leadership understands this, but they need to be able to work out a much more stable, much more step-by-step, much more public opinion consumed process, number one. The other one, of course, is Taiwan. And Taiwan is, in a way, is the same. Again, the entire agreement with the United States and China and, observing the one China policy. But what the United States have done since Mr. Trump is to increase its pressure on China. So again, with the Taiwanese, they're gaining increasing military technological transfer from the United States, and the Chinese understand this. And China has been increasingly penetrating the economic exclusive zone of Taiwan, not to mention its airspace, and that's sponsored by the Taiwanese Air Force and also by the U.S. Air Force and its allied nations. And it even puts countries like South Korea in a very difficult dilemma, because we don't want to be involved in a cross straits or the South China Sea conflict, but we're an ally of the United States. So the more tension builds up, the more dilemma and more instability it breeds into the allies and stability of the countries who are friendly to Russia, including South Korea. So I would argue those are three, but I think in relation to your last question, the issue is that if North Korea were to continue to develop, and they have, short, mid-range, and long-range missiles. And also the Chinese has been, as you know, they've been successful in executing the development of the MIRV system, the multiple reentry vehicles. And that is specifically targeting the US aircraft carriers. The United States has 11 aircraft carriers. China has only 2. They're very new. And I don't think they're really, because it needs 3 to 5 years training, they probably don't know how to operate it. But these increasing arms race is a challenge. And the stepped-up challenge can be, if North Korean nuclear problem is not going anywhere, then I think Taiwan, Japan, particularly Japan, because of the missile threat, and South Korea, at least conceptually and academically and even politically, has been the advice of potential development of nuclear weapons to neutralize. The latest sign of this is that South Korea had a missile limitation. We couldn't develop any missiles up to 50 kilometers. 30 years ago today, we don't have any limitation. So the more North Korea develops, and we don't have any limitation in terms of developing our missile system. So you can imagine beyond the North Korean threat, that can also and may cause problems for our friends or neighbors that we want to enjoy good relations, particularly Russia and China. So those are the 4 points. No. It's a very simple question, but there are 2 dimensions to it. North Korea presents a serious military threat in spite of its economic turmoil and, as I've said, the shutdown. The industrial capacity 15 years ago was 15%. So you can imagine energy manufacturing, the services, oriented industries and the health and so on. Now, having said that, South Korea needs to deter, because if you have a neighbor on the north with about 20,000 long-range artillery, it's kind of like having a knife up somebody's throat. That is exactly what North Korea has. And again, the depth is very short, right? I said 40 kilometers, 20 kilometers, DMZ, highly militarized, and then they have nuclear weapons. South Korea does not have any nuclear weapons. All the nuclear weapons were removed from the peninsula in 1991 under the late President Bush. And that was an agreement agreed with the departing Mr. Gorbachev and the support of Mr. Putin, and of course with Mr. At the time, Kim Jong-il, who died in 1994. So the question is how you deter. And the problem is that the military exercise is designed to prepare when, if there's an attack. And again, the record of the Korean War and more than 2,000 violations in the DMZ, sending agents and actually unleashing guerrilla warfare between 1960 and 1970. And now, because they don't have money, they're trying to use North Korean refugees as agents of influence in South Korea, on and on. So there is a serious military and a political threat. And the only way we can deter that is by having a combined Korea-US forces. And when you have a force, you cannot have its readiness unless you're exercised. So the entire exercise is defensive. And I think North Korea can also understand that it is defensive from our side, but it can be offensive. So the ball has to be on North Korea. If they choose to decrease their conventional artillery and also short-range weapons and other tactical weapons of mass destruction, which South Korea does not have, because we are under the extended nuclear deterrence with the United States, it shall solve and we can decrease. And even today, South Korean government for the past 4 years has attempted to arrange a rapprochement between the United States and North Korea, and it attempted to negotiate, and they haven't. So we decreased the exercise to just virtual computer game. So I think, to be fair, the ball is on the North Korean side. I think probably the best response would be, not according to me, but according to the research that I've done, yes and no. One is that the rise of China, simply that the 50% of the Chinese population over the past 40 years have been increased in their living standard. They become richer, more opportunity structures, and the level of happiness has gone up. The United States is not the same. In fact, the past 50% has their economic conditions and social conditions have been decreased. It's called the world of the despair, and it's the latest report from the Kennedy School of Government from Harvard, from my unit. Now, the issue here is that if you look at militarily, the United States spends over 4 times the amount that China has. Chinese economy, in terms of the size, will be probably about twice larger within the next 10 years, conservative estimates. Now, in terms of the regional influence of China and its ability to protect itself as a state and possibly project its power in the Asian region, yeah, it's certainly increased. And yes, as I've mentioned, their nuclear capability is increasing, including their space military force capability, as I've mentioned. They're working on satellites. So, for example, the United States has a space force. It's all geo-orbital fixed satellites. But now, because of its increasing vulnerability from competition, including from China and Russia and other countries, they want to develop, and they will execute satellites below that level so that it will diversify the vulnerability of not only the commercial, but military telecommunication facilities, which is directly related with nuclear and non-nuclear forces. So on the one hand, there is increasing challenge, but again, we can't overreact. But there is what's called a new kid on the block phenomenon. In other words, if you have if you've been controlling, let's say, a district with your supermarkets and with your friends and buddies and so on, and you see a new guy, then obviously you're going to be not happy, and then you will certainly feel that you're being challenged. And I think this is exactly what's happening with the United States. United States is spending not only 4 times, it has a global currency, it has a ideology and culture, but that obviously is being challenged, not because of China, but I believe it is because the other countries are taking their own independent stance, and they're also rising in their own way. And I think Afghanistan is a perfect example. And the United States cannot commit everywhere in the world that it's been able to do before the Cold War. So to answer your question, I think given the some 20,000 nuclear arsenals today, Russia and United States and China, increasing 500 or 1,000, I think they have a far way to go. However, they are becoming a nuclear force in their own right. And in fact, so I think China is a major regional global power, but you cannot, I think, interpret their capability. The 2 other sectors that China will run into traditional domestic problems. One is an aging population. This is a serious problem that all the countries has gone through, including EU, United States, even Korea, Japan. China is becoming increasingly aging. Number 2 is the increasing difference between the haves and the have-nots. So they will run into these economic and internal social problems. So I think, and then they have the problems of Taiwan, Hong Kong, and then of course the Xinjiang, the Uyghur issue, and now that China has to take care of the Taliban. So they understand that they're very limited, and so they need to focus. And so in that sense, yes, they're becoming a power, but I don't think they're at this moment up to the level that the United States foresees, because the United States is an imperially overstretched power, as Professor Paul Kennedy argued in his book in the year 2000. That's kind of the way I would look at it, if I may.